Who are these people?
Now this is how long ago? This is the 1840s.
Yeah, when it was huge. Yeah, it's like half of America.
Like, is it really that crazy to think that we would go back? It's only been like what, like 100 years? You can go
I
back.
mean, it's kind of crazy to me, but I want to hear where you're going from it.
Well, let's see. There's we're seeing a lot of hype and rhetoric around this. Bringing troops for
That's definitely
special.
true. They're definitely talking a lot
We
about it.
want to bring in a special military operation in Mexico. What does that sound like to you? A special military operation? Who else did a special military operation recently?
Yeah,
Because of a crisis that was happening at his border. Who was that?
I know. We're just gonna copy
Who
Russia's
did that?
playbook. Except we haven't been fighting. There's no
Wait,
there's
so
no proxy war going
are we
on.
the evil bad guy Putin now? That's what I want to understand. Are we the evil bad guy Putin now because we
I
want
know,
to
right? Are we gonna find
operate
out
a
that we've been
special
doing some
military operation
freaking?
at the border?
We're gonna find out we've been doing some freaking, like color revolution since 2014. There.
Yeah, but we get anyway. I put this together because like this is just something that's like been catching my eye because it's
I've been seeing. I
I
mean, it's all over the news. It's true. They do freaking talk about it a lot.
no, but you see it especially, and when I put this together for a reason because it's nearly every single Republican candidate, almost all of them, support this idea of bringing troops to Mexico, essentially.
And it's now time for America to wage war on the cartels. In this war, Joe Biden has sided against the United States and with the cartels. They are making more money than they've ever made before.
To take out fentanyl labs, to take out drug cartel operations. Would you support that kind of American military use?
Yes, and I will do it on day one.
I would use the U.S. military, if necessary, to annihilate the Mexican drug cartel.
What have I said I would do? I would use
Really
our
love
own
this
military
idea.
to secure our own southern border. I think that is legally, ethically, and constitutionally justified. That is how we seal the southern border. In fact, I think
I
that's
get
going to
some
be an
weird
approach
vibes
we'll
from
eventually
Vivek,
need
man.
to seal our own northern border as well.
Which is to use U.S. military force, if necessary, to address the Mexican drug cartels, who, yes, are terrorist organizations.
As Commander-in-Chief, I will unleash our military to crush the cartels and stop these terrorists from killing our kids.
And we can't continue to allow that to happen. When it comes to the cartels, we should treat them like the terrorists that they are. I would send special operations in there and eliminate them just like we eliminated ISIS and make sure that they know there's no place for them. If Mexico won't deal with it, I'll make sure I deal with it.
Well,
you know what you tell the Mexican president?
Mexico,
Either you
United
do it or
States
we
of
do it.
America.
But we are not going to let all of this lawlessness continue to happen. And we can do that by putting special ops in there, by doing cyber, by really being strategic. Just like we dealt with ISIS, you do the same thing with the cartels.
And so, like, how well did that go when we went to go deal with ISIS? Does anyone remember when we went to ISIS? What when we went to go fight ISIS? What happened after that? When we went to go fight in Afghanistan for 20 years?
Yeah, they ended up staying there. Yeah, or like freaking Al Qaeda.
Did we win? Did the terrorists win it? You tell me, because I mean.
So I mean, Go Start just put something up. The step one thing. That's kind of what I was saying. That's kind of what I was saying to you the kind of other day. But because I'm kind of the belief that like we enable the drug and human trafficking. So how interested are these apparatchiks and really addressing this?
I'm going to make the case for it. I'll make the case. I don't think it's that crazy of an idea. It's not just the current candidates that are running for. I mean, we've seen Lindsey Graham, who's been practically shouting.
Crazy.
Lindsey Graham's a maniac, dude. And here's him. He's calling.
He's never met a war he doesn't.
He's calling Mexico a narco terrorist state and needs to be held accountable. Listen to this.
commander-in-chief, but I'd like to give the commander-in-chief congressional authorization to use force to stop the poisoning of America. If they don't use it, we'll have an election in 2024, and people can run on a platform. I would use it if I could. So the point I'm trying to make is that the current situation is untenable. The Mexican government is no longer in charge of most of their country. It's a narco-terrorist state, and we should put on the table the tools of our military to go after these terrorists as if they were any other terrorist. And they're killing more Americans from drug cartels in Mexico than all the terrorist activity combined since 9/11.
You and I talked during the raids on ISIS and the beginning of the war on ISIS. They beheaded 6 or 7 Americans, tragically, horrible. And we went after them and took care of business. That's a little different than what we're seeing.
Why are we framing that as like a success story? Did that go well? Did that really go that well that when we went to go fight ISIS?
This is how depraved we are. Like, we have no excuses. So just bomb other.
Are we just pretending that went okay?
Dude, here's my whole thing. My whole thing is that like when you start talking so openly and on public news shows and TV shows about outright war with another country, like just straight up war with another country, that's like a level of insanity that like is just so beyond the pale to me. Because like AMLO's not cool with this. AMLO's like, don't be bringing people to my country.
Oh no, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
You know, so like why does the US just get to talk so openly and casually about like waging a fucking thousands of people sending in troops to war in another country that's not theirs? And
no, this is literally a talking point. This is a talking point that people are they're running on this. They're running on going on military operation in Mexico. But just an extra spice. Here's Marjorie Taylor Greene saying that she literally wants to bomb Mexico. Listen,
there's so many things that we can stop. Another thing we need to stop is funding the war in Ukraine. Don, I can't understand why
let's
we're
bomb
fighting
Mexico
a war in
instead.
Ukraine, and we're not bombing the Mexican cartels who are poisoning Americans every single day. And I know that sounds extreme.
They're saying it out loud.
This is embarrassing.
We need to stop funding Ukraine so we can bomb the cartels.
There's so many things that we can stop. Another thing we need to stop
cluster
is funding
bombs
the war
on
in Ukraine. Don, I can't understand why we're fighting a war in Ukraine, and we're not bombing the Mexican cartels who are poisoning Americans every single day. And I know that sounds extreme. I'm not talking about the Mexican government or the Mexican people. I'm talking about the cartels. They're murdering.
Oh, just bomb the cartel
in America these days. I mean, when I interviewed Kevin on this podcast, he was talking about.
It's absolutely.
Guys, listen, there's like I haven't gone down the whole rabbit hole, but I know enough that like the US runs on like the drug trade, and I've done a show on breaded circuses where I've like explored the topic of like human trafficking. Like, I know I'm pushing back too much. You should just do your story. I'm gonna
show the video that the guy kind of goes through all this, but I really want people to pay because the way that we sell wars to the public, you hear a lot of these buzzwords chiming around, right? Like how we need to, just like how we fought ISIS, just like how we went.
Okay, so they're trying to make like a false equivalent.
No, listen, really pay very, very close to the language that these people are using, and tell me if this sounds any familiar to you.
Mexico. Fentanyl is a weapon of mass destruction being unleashed on America from your country. It's coming from your country. You're allowing safe havens for these groups to operate with impunity. What you're doing is not working. Your country is being used by narco-terrorists to poison America. We ask you to help us. The best thing can happen is that we work together, but I will tell the president of Mexico that what you're doing is not working.
Yeah, no.
We're going to change the game. We're going to up the ante. To the president of Mexico, fentanyl is a weapon of mass destruction.
Listen, dude, what would you think President Biden would say if AMLO was just on Mexican TV and was being like, yo, we need to bomb the shit out of fucking Texas and Florida so like people stop fucking hustling coke and freaking like trading it back and forth. Like what, like the cartels are kind of like a mutual enemy, right? Like the Mexico doesn't really want the cartels either, do they? I mean the cartel to a degree probably like pays off the government a little bit. Like I don't know that much. I assume there's a little bit of corruption there. But like I think that it's my understanding that the cartels kind of have an outsized power against the government at this point.
So I feel like the misunderstanding here, or at least like the case that I'm trying to make, is that I don't think a war or like military action per se against like specific cartels necessarily harms the drug trade. In fact, I think it actually enhances it. And so you see these patterns that
I would agree with that. Okay, that's
so like this. So this happens. So you see this with Afghanistan, and it's funny that they bring up the ISIS thing because when we went into Afghanistan, opium production increased by like 3,000%, and so we have these patterns with wars, like so war and the drug trade sort of like go hands in hand because once you go in, you demolish the country. The only thing they have left to sell is these poppy seeds for shitty money, and then you're transferring it over to the U.S. And
your take is actually like more cynical than I thought. Is that like you think that like they'd work something out where they're bombing the country to increase the like?
I don't think it's as convoluted as that, but like I think they understand how.
It's not going to be a negligible impact, and they still get to like help the defense industry.
This is a repeat of Vietnam, Afghanistan, Laos. And then this is why.
Why would AMLO be cool with Reaper drones being freaking used?
It doesn't matter if AMLO's cool with it or not. If it happens to be a war with Mexico, they said that it's whether you cooperate or not. We're gonna send troops in, and it will force the Mexican military to respond. This is all the way back from the 1940s, 1960s. This is CIA telling you how the drug trade works and how they use drug money to fund the wars. They are using the drug money that the fentanyl crisis. They're using that as extra money. Oh, you think the defense budget, that's the only money that's being used to fund wars and the MI6? Absolutely not. It's human trafficking, it's drug trafficking, it's the black market. Listen.
1972, a U.S. intelligence agent in Southeast Asia sent a secret field report to Customs. It suggested a serious conflict of interest. Quote, "It was ironic that the CIA should be given the responsibility of narcotics intelligence, particularly since they were supporting the prime movers. Even though the CIA was, in fact, facilitating the movement of opiates to the U.S., they steadfastly hid behind the shield of secrecy and said that all was done in the interest of national security." End quote.
Money was always there. We had a program. In fact,
okay.
That's the reason the agency supply system was so much better than the military supply system.
Cash.
They didn't have to go through a procurement system, a bureaucracy that made everything cost 3 times as much.
How was the war in Laos financed?
U.S. appropriated funds.
Through which agency?
I think through the CIA and through the Defense Department, both.
How much of the money that was going to pay these thousands and thousands of tribesmen?
It reminds me of those pictures you see of all the gold that we stole from freaking Iraq.
Yeah, and so think about it like this. So like when you go to bomb like a cartel, like let's say like we're targeting, I'm not familiar with the different kinds of cartels. There's a video that kind of gets into it. You're empowering all of the rival cartels in the area. It's split by like counties. Like their control. They
got borders.
The entire they control different regions. So all you're doing is really empowering all the other cartels to come in and swoop in and potentially actually bring in operations in the United States. But listen to this.
Thousands and thousands of tribes.
We're also using the money to fund rival so like in this case scenario, we would use the money.
The money would also be used to have the rival gangs fucking fight.
Rival gangs to fight the gangs that we're fighting, just like ISIS, just like Al Qaeda. It's a repeat of the same exact thing.
Tribesmen to fight for us and to pay these thousands and thousands of tribesmen to fight for us, for the CIA. Where was that money coming from?
From the trade.
From the opium trade?
Yes, surely.
How would that work?
Well, money would be paid for the transportation and the safe arrival of the merchandise to its proper destination. And that money would be paid to the carrier, the person transporting the merchandise. And then that money would be used to pay off the farmers. But as I told you, they got so little of it that there was an enormous amount left over. And it was that money that was used to feed to the peasants in order to get them to continue not only fighting for us, but also continuing to give us very important intelligence about the movement of the North Vietnamese.
The Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia grew directly out of our covert policies there. Before it had been run by French intelligence with the Corsican Mafia. We took over with our Air America and civil air transport planes flying in arms to our allies, flying back out with the heroin. The first target being U.S. GIs during the Vietnam War, the second target being the United States itself.
We're funneling the drugs back to the United States on purpose.
Did you ever see Did you ever read the article by Gary Webb about Iran-Contra being funded through Nicaraguan coke?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
all
like
the same repeat.
Yeah, it's all the same. It's all the same stuff. So I'll concede there. I'll concede there.
Do you see the angle that I'm coming at here?
Yes, the part that I can't wrap my head around is like, I don't care what country you are, if you're bringing drones into like my country, and I know that you had a president like Obama who fucking 9 out of 10 people he fucking killed with a drone was a civilian, I'm hitting up Russia and China.
Oh yeah.
You know, so that's
He's already buddy. They already don't like him because he doesn't like Israel. He supports the.
It's just like they're like, what are they gonna do? Are they gonna kill him?
They don't like him. They do not like him. Or whatever relations they have, whatever friendly relations they currently have.
I'm also cynical enough to believe that they would even just say that there needs to be a war in Mexico with the cartels, just to help the defense stocks, just so they think that we have like some forever war at our borders. Oh, well, we can always freaking have like drones and freaking Reapers and freaking shit hovering around in freaking Mexico, so we can always count on for the next 20 or 30 years, you know, those freaking things being used. So I could see them doing something like that. I don't know. I will be beside myself the day that we just have troops in Humvees just go across the border and just go into Mexico. I just and I saw that other video you sent me with the guy saying that it should just be a totally air superiority. But
yeah, watch this. Will the U.S. actually declare war on Mexico? Let's see how.
Because for years, Mexico's troubles have spilled over across the border into the United States. Over 15 million illegal immigrants are currently residing within the country, with an estimated hundreds, if not thousands, more entering the country nearly every day. The vast majority of whom enter through the Mexican-American border, and a good number of which aren't even citizens of Mexico, but merely taking advantage of the country's lacking regulations and security to enter the United States. This has left many with concerns about precisely who is entering the country, especially if such individuals have links to major terrorist groups from overseas. Of the new arrivals, many of those migrants who are citizens of Mexico are motivated to flee by the very conditions created by the cartels, creating a vicious cycle which sees Mexico's problems go unsolved and slowly brings those same troubles to the United States. These illegal immigrants strain the American job market, discouraging businesses from raising wages for American workers when illegal workers will do the same jobs for less than minimum wage, further leaving fewer job opportunities for American citizens. Hundreds and even thousands of metric tons of drugs are smuggled across the border both by the cartels and by individuals, with these same drugs contributing to some 100,000 overdose deaths among Americans every year, over twice as many deaths as caused by guns in the same period. This is not even taking into account that the southern border has become a hotbed for human trafficking, so much so that it is estimated to be a multi-billion-dollar industry for these modern-day slavers. Beyond this, some of the same violence and gang activity which has plagued Mexico has now begun emerging in the United States. The United States has even seen the growth of the domestic Mexican mafia, a group which originated in the United States and which is regarded to be just as powerful and as dangerous as any of Mexico's largest cartels. For these reasons, as well as on account of a slow and half-hearted effort at securing the border by both countries, not just one but several American politicians, particularly on the side of the Republican Party, have begun demanding that if Mexico continues to demonstrate an inability to stabilize itself, that the United States will use its own military force to stabilize the country. The politician receiving perhaps the most scrutiny for this proposal is presidential hopeful.
I'm sorry. That's like, it's a good video, but it just made me think about something. It's like, it's another thing about like kind of what I was talking about earlier with capitalism is that like these politicians know that their donor class needs cheap labor. They know that they have to keep searching for cheap labor. Where does that cheap labor come from? As you just showed in this video, human trafficking. So like why are they like playing both sides, you know?
Because it enhances.
You think it actually boosts it? You think
it boosts it more? Yeah. When you if you imagine a war-torn country, you don't think that human trafficking is going to boost exponentially? You have a.
Yeah, why would? But okay, so they got to kill AMLO or something.
If you devastate
they got to get a puppet in there.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's only. And let me ask you, like, so do you think that these politicians are coming up with this by themselves?
No,
they have to be fed this by someone.
100%. They all have the same, like you.
They have to be fed the line. You know,
it's the same thing with the China. It's the same thing with the China talking points that we see coming from like what Tucker or Alex Jones.
They're fed. It's fed. It's fed by someone higher up.
Vivek Ramaswamy, who called for a special military operation into Mexico for the purpose of eradicating the cartels. But Vivek isn't alone in this position. A total of 4 high-profile Republican presidential candidates in 2024 have made military intervention in Mexico a part of their platform. Vivek Ramaswamy, Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, and of course Donald Trump.
Unreal.
Meanwhile, nearly every declared Republican candidate has called for at minimum the classification of the cartels as terrorist groups. In Congress, a wide range of Republicans from Tom Cotton to Dan Crenshaw to Mike Waltz have all vocalized support for military intervention in Mexico, with many others across both parties calling for at minimum a stronger response to such groups.
Dude.
The Democratic position has long aimed to treat the effects of Mexican instability, arguing for pathways to citizenship, providing treatment and care for addiction, sending financial aid to the Mexican government, and creating more opportunities for both citizens and immigrants to discourage criminal activity. However, if the situation worsens, it's quite possible the call for intervention could also emerge on the Democratic side, especially if Mexico continues its flirtation with Russia and China as it has done in recent years, and if it begins adopting more anti-democratic practices, which some American politicians have expressed concern over. Most interesting,
and they support Palestine too.
Interestingly enough, is
anti-Israel.
A seemingly very vocal support for such an intervention by a minority of Mexican Americans. The reasoning appearing to be that they fled Mexico in fear of the government's failure to solve the crisis and genuinely believe that only an American intervention has a chance of solving it and perhaps providing them the opportunity to return home. This is a sentiment not too dissimilar from the number of Chinese Americans who support.
What?
That's crazy. So they think that they genuinely believe that the U.S. has to attack Mexico to like liberate them.
Yeah, to save. They believe that fentanyl is literally a weapon of mass destruction.
American intervention against the People's Republic of China.
Oh, and they think it's Chinese fentanyl labs. Yeah.
China for the sake of ending communist rule. American interest in a Mexican intervention is also distinctly different than just about every other major American conflict since the turn of the century, none of which were even based in the Western Hemisphere, let alone right along the American border. While Islamic terrorism had a major effect upon American life, many feel that the issues posed by Mexican instability have continuously affected the day-to-day lives of American citizens nationwide, and have only compounded and grown year by year. The proximity between the United States and Mexico, the degree to which Mexico's issues affect the United States, as well as the history the two countries have shared, allows the typically anti-war, anti-interventionist America First faction of the Republican Party to justify this particular military action as falling within the bounds of domestic American concerns, and within the historic bounds of the Monroe Doctrine. One might say that the politicians arguing on behalf of intervening in Mexico are no different than the politicians who initiated the wars in the Middle East, and that such.
Yeah.
Do you know about the Monroe Doctrine, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So
okay. So tell our listeners if they don't know what the Monroe Doctrine is.
Well, you explain it. You explain it. Okay. I'm not gonna know them by heart, but
so because basically what the Monroe Doctrine says is that the global South, okay, literally is the U.S. backyard. Okay, the U.S. literally feels like that if they want to just fuck around in another country that's poorer than them, that they can just bomb the shit out of it, or they can colonize it, they can do whatever they want. That's the Monroe Doctrine. They believe that any country that's poor is like their domain. That's why you have what was the base?
And this was
like a Russian base in Cuba.
Well, it goes all the way back with like the Louisiana Purchase and Polker. Some other president came in at some point, but they tried to buy a lot of Mexico at first.
I believe it.
I showed the map at the beginning, but
yeah, it was a huge bit.
This is what they're running on.
Politicians are hypocrites for calling themselves America First or criticizing the neoconservatives. However, it must be stressed that the motivations are certainly coming from different places. Middle Eastern wars were far off policing actions on behalf of the United States protecting its global democratic world order. The actions of and within these countries had little to no impact on the American conscience. Whereas what goes on in Mexico does have a direct impact upon American lives, and from the perspectives of the politicians now advocating these policies, they believe that resolving the problems that Mexico is facing will prevent the spread of and even stop those same problems in the United States. Mexican President Obrador has taken these threats seriously and has assumed.
So I'm just like, I'm a little brain damaged, so I gotta like say these things as I think about them. But like, just to kind of tie things together, do we kind of see how these threats could be like kind of like an imperialist thing? That this is actually a form of imperialism, us sending troops, and if what you say is accurate, which I could actually see, that like us creating a refugee crisis in Mexico, and us creating a freaking cartel wars, infighting within Mexico, could create a refugee crisis and actually increase human trafficking, then it stands to reason that what is actually happening here is a form of imperialism. And, again, it's the capitalists might have something to do with it, deflating prices and trying to make it harder for Americans to live, and that there's an actual desire for illegal labor.
Well, like that's why I'm saying like when we're making this argument, I think we have to understand that the CIA is probably already 10 steps ahead.
That's kind of what I'm laughing about.
We're already talking
the CIA is already in every single one of those.
Exactly. So like if we're sitting here and we're trying to like analyze a plan that's like, that's coming forth, or whatever like U.S. imperial policy is coming next on the table, you sort of like to understand it from the point that like.
It's interesting. It's real cynical to think that like we're basically doing it for drugs and human labor power.
Well, but like there's like an evolution of like understanding like our imperial power. I feel like even after World War II, like we sort of felt like the big bosses. Like, that's like we want to go into Vietnam and like show off our guts or whatever, and so the blowback from that.
Yeah, like what would be the blowback from this? Can you imagine?
It almost doesn't matter because the chaos is part of it. At what point does it become like ignoring and then transforms into like a willful intention? Because we see what happens in Vietnam, and then we go like we're in Vietnam and we're in Afghanistan. And we're shipping the poppy, like the opium, back to the U.S. Why else would we be doing that if it wasn't to drug our entire population?
Right.
If it wasn't for things like Iran-Contra, what would be the point other than to purposely drug the entire population and make them like dumb, like
and fund more wars?
Yeah, and it ultimately it's a
damn.
It's benefiting all around. It's all chaos, and it's not like we're any new to destabilizing the global South, and we see the results of that, and we understand what happens. We see how the drug trade comes through. It's nothing new. I don't see anything new happening.
Position that Mexico's affairs are none of the U.S.'s concern, that the issues facing the U.S. are not at all Mexico's fault or responsibility, and that any continued discussion of military intervention will be met with an information campaign by Mexico to encourage its diaspora living within the U.S. to politically boycott.
I don't know what Amo's plans are at all.
He's gonna get suicided, dude. If they really want, you can't just drone strike another country and be like, hey, either get with it or get over it.
Anyway, I thought, man, like whatever the plan is, like I feel like this was like a good analysis of like what the plan actually was. So like this is like not this video specifically, but like that, that showing like where
This guy
or
did
Brad,
have
or like, or at least like where the intention is. But like, if you're curious as to like how exactly this would play out,
he gave the analysis like so I was watching. There's this other guy like Brian Burlitek does on his like Ukraine analysis.
yeah, no, I love all these like geographic like war graphic channels that like kind of show. Yeah, but this is like this really shows
against the cartels dates back a couple of years, but really took root when members of the Small Scorpions cartel fired at an American white minivan they mistook for rivals. In the end, 2 out of 4 Americans in that vehicle lost their lives. The Wall Street Journal wrote, Republicans' new border plan: send military into Mexico. That's because Representatives Dan Crenshaw and Mike Waltz introduced a new bill. This is the official document from the United States Congress. The word cartel was mentioned 21 times and would legitimize the use of U.S. military assets against the cartels right into Mexico. And the most shocking about all this is that according to the Washington Post, declaring war on Mexican cartels is popular. They're citing a poll where 55% of all voters and 86% of Republicans would be in favor of deploying the U.S. military across the border.
We're fucked. We're absolutely fucked.
People are so bloodthirsty, man.
This country, if there's anyone that deserves to get nuked, it's us. I'm willing to say that.
Only ones who have used nukes.
In Mexico. Meanwhile, Senator Graham also introduced the Ending the Narcos Act of 2023 that aims to label cartels as TRST groups. Now, the main reason often brought up for this military intervention, the casus belli, is that Mexican-produced fentanyl is thought to cause the death of between 80,000 and 100,000 Americans a year. Then there's an increasing number of bolder and bolder cartel incursions into U.S. territory. On the 8th of August, a group of cartel gunmen armed with rifles and body armor were seen on cameras crossing illegally into Texas, near the city of Fronton. As a matter of fact, it was reported that these armed members of the cartels are the ones escorting the migrants across the border. It's been a known fact for a while, but now we have visual evidence. The New York Times now claims that the cartel...
It's a network. It's a controlling...
Yeah, I mean, like, that's not...
It's not just about the fentanyl. It's the drug.
The human trafficking.
It's human trafficking. It's war. It's weapons.
So, does he give the number on the human trafficking? Because we talked about it. It's like a million, almost a million people they bring over the border.
It's $1 billion business. Listen to this.
Cartels are the ones smuggling migrants across the U.S.-Mexico border. They write that this is now an industry worth billions of dollars. Cartels have increased their involvement in migrant smuggling over the past decade, transforming the operation into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. And if migrants are expelled from the US back towards Mexico, they're immediately caught by the awaiting cartels and are sometimes back on the way towards the US border in a matter of hours. NBC News reported that in the fiscal year of 2022, there were 2.76 million entries of migrants into the US through the Mexican border. Cartels even organize a journey of the migrants up to the border with planes and buses for a sum of roughly $10,000 per person. And lastly, in the past 20 years, Mexican cartels have also massively expanded throughout the United States. And in this one, a 2020 map from the DEA showing what cities are under control of various Mexican cartels in the United States.
So we understand that this is all intentional. We understand that the CIA funds these people.
Yeah, this is like kind of like some propaganda.
This is the intentional purpose of trying to drug America, because why? Fentanyl turns everyone into mindless zombies, and what is the the American dream really of the elites is to turn everyone into a quasi retarded population where no one asks any questions and everyone just goes along with whatever.
Yeah, but doesn't fluoride just straight up, or not fluoride, fentanyl just straight up kill people?
Yeah, I've seen it. It's terrible. It's horrible. It's
just believe that.
like tearing like absolute like not even Rust Belt anymore. Like white suburban families is getting completely destroyed by this shit. It's way worse than you think.
That they now maintain a presence in over 1,000 cities. And this is...
I'm surprised you don't know anyone who died from fentanyl. I know I can name like
I know people. I had a friend who OD'd on OxyContin.
Yeah, OxyContin's a bad one too. No, but fentanyl's like especially bad. It's synthetic, and no one.
I had a friend tell me he knew somebody who died from contact, and like I found that hard to believe, but that's like the only time somebody's ever told me. Because you hear those cop stories. Oh, a cop looked at fentanyl funny and he freaking like needed Narcan. Like that doesn't really happen.
That doesn't happen. Yeah, that doesn't really happen. But
where many in Washington want to launch their own special military operation. Not a war, just a special military operation. The first thing that is often brought up by politicians to fight the cartels was to carry out missile and drone strikes against their drug labs, as well as on leaders of the major cartels, like the Cartel de Sinaloa, which was founded by El Chapo. The US has all the satellites and aerial reconnaissance tools necessary for such operations. The DEA and US intelligence know Mexico like their backyard. They have many informants, and they know exactly what's going on the ground.
To say like that like we're stepping into like a mindless mistake, or like we don't know like what we're doing by like throwing
we're
troops
giving
at,
18-year-olds with
exactly what we're doing.
Bro, we're giving 18-year-olds with Xbox controllers drone reapers to go freaking do recon over the fucking state of Mexico without their president's permission.
Yeah,
that's the level of like depravity we're at.
That's where we're at. That's where we're at. And we have them. We have them essentially. We already have Mexico essentially on lockdown. It's just these cartels.
This is crazy.
These cartels that not even the government can control. The Mexican government, they've been trying to take care of the cartels for years. They can't do anything. They're essentially their own government at this point.
It's got to be like that. It's got to be so bad where I am.
It is that. No, it literally is that bad. Like the cartels control like regions of Mexico. It's not. It's
from a technical perspective. There's nothing.
This is this is why I wanted to like show like this video, because like this really demonstrates like I didn't know a lot about like the cartel like ins and outs and like the different factions and stuff. But like listen,
stopping the US to carry out such strikes. The US Air Force has 300 to 400 MQ-9 Reapers that can each fire up to 16 AGM-114 Hellfire missiles, equivalent to the payload capacity of an Apache helicopter. The Reaper's long endurance allows it to loiter over a specific area for an extended period. The Reaper's long endurance allows it to loiter over a specific area for an extended period, providing continuous surveillance of potential targets like safe houses and supply routes. The Reaper's advanced sensors, including high-resolution cameras and synthetic aperture radar, enable it to identify and track individuals and vehicles of interest. As you can see, this drone is perfect for missions against cartels in Mexico. The US Air Force could also make use of its F-35. For example, in 2019, the US carried 7,000 airstrikes in Afghanistan. They could unleash the same payload on the cartels. One problem is that from all its air bases, the US Air Force would have trouble engaging targets on the southern part of Mexico, although this could be solved with the support of the US Navy and their aircraft carriers. On top of that, the national interest reported that an upgrade will let Reapers fly out from aircraft carriers. So by positioning one aircraft carrier in the Gulf of Mexico and another along the Pacific coast, would allow a full coverage of Mexican territory. Of course, we could develop the technicalities of US military strike capabilities, but let's talk in a practical way. Reality is, every time a lab would be destroyed, another 5 will pop up. Alright, here's a game. Try to spot the fentanyl lab, alright?
And I also wanted to point out, like, I feel like Americans would feel a lot more comfortable with this war if it was a lot like a, air, like drone war, as opposed to like actually sending troops in there. Can you imagine if like they just happened to like drone bomb Mexico?
Well, but that begs the question, because there's kind of like this, like you cannot.
You don't have to send. You don't have to like send in American men in there.
You can't win a war without boots on the ground. What are you doing?
What do you mean? Obama did a drone. We've been doing drone wars for years.
Right, and we never won them.
Yeah. Watch this.
Take a guess, aim, and shoot! Quickly enough, the cartels will simply relocate their labs into urban areas. Places filled with civilians. For example, malls, hospitals, churches, schools, and then it's checkmate. The US Air Force can't do anything. The other option would be to simultaneously carry out strikes against cartel leadership, like what was done against various TRST organizations across the Middle East. Thing is, if you strike one cartel leader, eventually you'll have 5 new targets. How about I pull out my massive map that I showed you last time? The once powerful Gulf cartel has fractured in Mexico's northern state of Tamaulipas, with different splinter groups jockeying for position in key cities. The more splinter groups, the more violence, the more chaos, the more civilian casualties. So if the generals of the US military think they can achieve success just by using aerial means, then in that case, they have learned nothing from the past 25 years.
Do you understand? Like, do you see like where I'm coming from here? Like how like this is a purposeful disaster. It is an absolute American dream.
But that's what I mean. Like
be able to
just
destabilize
how.
Mexico and have.
So Mexico City is what, 13, 14 million people? Okay, maybe more than that. How do you think the Mexican people are going to feel when they know
The
that
Mexican
they
government would have to respond. They would have to respond to that. Well, I mean,
like you think it's just like a couple. You just think it's a couple like terminally online Americans that know that freaking Obama had a drone strike program that killed 90% civilians? Wouldn't that scare the shit out of you if a fucking drone was just patrolling over your city?
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd scare the shit out of you, and you're an American. Like, so I can't imagine the freaking blowback that will come. Like, maybe you're right. Maybe those crazy motherfuckers will fucking do something like this. But like, the blowback is going to be so bad.
I'm not saying this is coming like anytime like in the near future. I think it's something that we can reasonably expect. Just like Taiwan and China, this is connected.
Well, that's like I was saying, man. On any given scale with America, they're going to go to war because we're out of options. We don't have the petrodollar, which was a source of imperialism, losing the petrodollar.
We're flailing our arms.
And we're losing dollar. We're losing dollar. The dollar having hegemonic quality to it. So what do? They just have war. Okay, well, if like our dollar doesn't have any value, then we'll back up our value of our dollar by putting a gun to your head.
The neocon game plan, well, maybe not necessarily this, but like whatever this like interventionist or anti-interventionist like Trump or like faction is like saying, they fully believe that Ukraine is not worth it. It's not worth the tax dollars.
True.
Because we could be funding wars that are to our benefit. They believe that there are wars.
I know. That's the crazy thing.
And those wars take place in China and they take place in Mexico. And they're connected because they believe that there's Chinese labs in Mexico that are creating the fentanyl. So,
and there was
not true. There's validity.
To tie it back again before we continue, there was a salient point that they made. I don't know if we skipped past it or not, but one of the issues with imperialism is that by having a country that is so antagonizing and always threatening war to other countries, forces other countries to invest more in their defense instead of their development. So by being antagonizing, we actually slow the growth of the world and slow the growth of these countries that we antagonize. We can continue.
But you're also like you're enhancing the black market. Do you see it?
Yeah, absolutely enhancing the black market.
Do you see like how I showed it before? Like
100%.
You're making all of these rival gangs. You're actually making the drug trade worse.
This is the wet dream of American warfare. Destroy the enemy solely using the Air Force. They didn't work during the Vietnam War and still doesn't work today. What you have to know is that the Sinaloa cartel is considered to be the wealthiest, most stable, and decentralized organization. They can survive the loss of key leadership figures, but not necessarily the others. So chances are this US missile strike campaign might actually strengthen the Sinaloa cartel by getting rid of all their rivals. The US will necessarily need boots on the ground. Now another talking point about these politicians would be to send in these special forces. Seems like they watch too many Hollywood movies and end up believing their own propaganda. Now, let's say the US decides to unleash on the Sinaloa cartel. We're talking airstrikes, drone strikes, spec ops. US intelligence could even cooperate with rival cartels and use their informants to destroy the Sinaloa cartel. Now, once the Sinaloa cartel has been seriously crippled, who do you think will fill the void? The rivals of the Sinaloa cartel, like the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, which is already a growing military powerhouse in Mexico. So unless they ally with a cartel to fight off the other ones, which, by the way, politically speaking, is not possible, the US military would have to engage all the cartels simultaneously, and it will be total chaos in Mexico. It's almost mission impossible, and the sharp increase in violence which will result from this chaos will push the Mexican government to react. How long is Mexico going to tolerate these aerial incursions into its territory. The next option would be a full-on special military operation. To fully cripple cartel endeavors, the US would need to take physical control of all ports of entry of narcotics into Mexico, especially Manzanillo and Lázaro Cárdenas, from where fentanyl precursors arrive from China, as well as the main logistic hubs of this trade. The former president of the United States, Donald Trump, now famous for his mugshot, said that he could send 250,000 US troops across the border. I mean, maybe this is gonna drive recruitment.
Insane. Absolutely crazy.
That's twice as many as Ukraine.
This is
retarded numbers.
That's the anti-war option that you have. The anti-intervention just option is 250,000 troops at the border. In absolutely crazy wet dream. And like to counterpoint with the understand, like, of course AMLO would freak out. President definitely would not have this.
Well, that's the thing.
But like, let me ask you: do you really think that the Mexican army has any chance against the U.S. military?
The Mexican military?
Yeah.
Well, that's not really the point that I'm getting at. It's like the kind of where I see it is like, if the US isn't trying to take land, they're not trying to colonize, like what are they doing with 250,000 troops? They're just trying to perpetuate war. They're just trying to create another forever war. And that's why I think AMLO's like
destabilize Mexico, yes.
And that's why I think AMLO's like, fuck that. And
of course, yeah. So what can you possibly do if you're Mexico in that situation? You would have to call in Russia and China.
You'd hit up. That's what I'm saying. Like, this is like.
So would you say this is like a world war kind of conflict?
I could see this freaking turning into a freaking Taiwan situation where it's like you keep freaking like poking the bear, and then eventually people are like, yo, what the fuck? And now it's a freaking war between 4 countries.
Like, I can't imagine. So I simply just can't imagine just one war between Mexico and America, and that's it. And who do you think wins in that outcome? Do you think
there's no way the U.S. is all by itself?
If you just Mexico and the U.S., who do you think stands out from that?
The Mexico's hitting up China and Russia, and it's over.
No, I'm saying without Russia, without China. Let's say it's a one-on-one U.S. military.
I don't know. I think that's like.
I don't
want to make that hypothetical.
U.S. military. How much?
When was the last time the U.S. won a war?
How much money do we fund our defense, and how much money does Mexico fund their defense?
Well, right, but how much of their defense is actually
how many of our military bases are in Mexico?
How much of their actual defense is the cartels?
They can't control the cartels.
Yeah, but the cartels aren't going to let Mexico go to the Americans. They're going to fight. You know, the Zapatistas live in freaking southern Mexico. The Zapatistas aren't part of Mexico, but they're going to be like, get the fuck out of here, Americans.
We operate in America, too.
Huh?
They operate in America, too.
The cartels, right? And like, I saw that graph, and like, I would want to see a little bit more information on that, on what they mean by
this is still speculation. This is just an analysis. I mean, I don't know.
Rates up, because right now a lot of people in the US Army would not be thrilled with this. Oh my god, what? You mean I actually have to go to war? Shooting guns make my ears ring, and it's gonna scrape off my nail polish. No, let's talk numbers. An expeditionary force of 250,000 would be 33%.
I feel like we would be doing like TikTok dances at the border. We're like, yeah, we're going
at the freaking huge fences. Like,
it's gonna be like a TikTok video of like,
this is so sad.
We're gonna go fight the
freaking
cartel.
American e-girls freaking doing freaking dances.
You know, like the IDF has e-girls.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
More than the total number of troops present during the surge in Iraq in 2007. At least it's next door. So from a logistics perspective, it shouldn't be that complicated. I'm just thinking, if 170,000 coalition troops had trouble maintaining order in Iraq, What is it going to be like in Mexico?
Here's
A
the other
country
thing,
with
like,
3 times more inhabitants.
And
Okay, this is
we're still trying to fund a forever war, and we're out of weapons to do it. We're already tanked with Ukraine. We're already out.
Yeah.
So okay, so here's the thing. We're out of weapons. Like, we're pretty much all of the like HIMARS rockets and the freaking artillery is accounted for Ukraine for like the next. It's accounted for, okay? F-16s accounted for. They're being sold to Ukraine, okay? Zelensky is buying that shit on credit, right? Ukraine's going to have a freaking odious debt by the time this is all over. Remember, we're talking about imperialism, IMF. Ukraine has like its worst years ahead of it.
Oh, it's done.
But
it's not even going to be a
But
yeah.
Who's paying for Mexico's war? Who's paying for us to send freaking F-35s and freaking rockets to cartels in Mexico? Who's paying for that? We gonna bill AMLO? No. Like, it just seems it's like this it really is like that neocon freaking wet dream. It just seems like absolutely ridiculous to me. Like, maybe in like if everything went perfectly and they like all their Raytheon buddies were like, hey, I just happen to have 10,000 freaking artillery rounds sitting in my garage. Let's go take over a country.
Do you know about the history of Mexico? Do you know about like you know we wanted to take all of it, right? You know, it was like a compromise to not take all of it.
It doesn't surprise me. I don't remember the story.
No, that was like part of the compromise. So like there was actually a really big argument. Maybe I'll play that video. There was actually like a really big argument like that, like over like whether or not to take over like Mexico completely. Some of it was like due to like the slave trade. Hold on. But
And that is 4.5 times bigger than Iraq. Using the same ratio as in Iraq, the US military would need to deploy 765,000 troops to fully cover Mexico, and they would face hundreds of well-equipped formations of guerrillas that are now becoming expert in the use of IEDs and grenade-dropping drones.
Cartel-operated drones dropped 33 bombs.
We also have to factor in geography. Mexico is a highly mountainous country coupled with lots of major urban areas. The metropolitan area of Mexico City alone has over 20 million inhabitants. But I'm sure a couple Navy SEAL teams and Batman together could make the streets of Mexico City safe. The special military operation in Mexico, the SMOM, would be like the fusion of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, while cranking up the difficulty by 4 levels. That alone presents it as such a bad idea. It reminds me so much of what the US government expected with the Pancho Villa expedition, and most likely it's gonna end the same way, with US forces going home, having failed to capture the guerrilla leaders they wanted. Check out what Mexican newspaper El Economista wrote. It is delusional to think that the North Americans will be able to achieve with an expeditionary force what the Mexican government has not achieved by deploying 600,000 elements in the last 15 years. Okay, bro, I understand. But US military commanders won't change sides for a $10,000 bribe. We know the Mexican army could destroy the cartels tomorrow if they wanted. But the problem is their leaders. There are countless of corruption scandals of high-ranking Mexican military officials in the pockets of various cartels, or how some army commanders sold entire batches of weapons to the cartels. The cartels know that a US military intervention would mean the end of business for them. So we can believe that a lot of money was spent in the recent month in the Mexican media. However, in a way, El Economista has a point. To succeed in this mission, the US military has no other choice but to act with the support of the Mexican army and local security forces, just from a military perspective, to have full physical presence all over the country, and not simply be stranded in bases like in the Middle East, but to actually go out into the country, build numerous checkpoints, search for narcotic shipments in ports and warehouses, patrol both cities and the countryside at all times, and still retain enough forces to chase down cartel gunmen in La Sierra. The White House will need the cooperation of the Mexican government, which they absolutely don't. Mexican President Obrador has rejected calls for the United States military to intervene.
We are not going to permit any foreign government to intervene in our territory, much less that a foreign government's armed forces intervene.
I mean, in that case, Mexico would suffer from an illegal and unprovoked invasion. And now many American politicians say that the Mexican government...
Illegal, unprovoked invasion.
Invasion. Yeah, an invasion.
Is working hand in hand with the cartels to prevent such a special military operation. But what they seem to forget is that in Mexico, the sight of United States Army columns marching into their country is a taboo topic. There is still a lot of resentment among the Mexican population about the loss of Texas, the follow-up Mexican-American War, when American troops ended up storming the capital of Mexico City and annexed 55% of Mexico's landmass. And a couple decades later, in 1914, when the US occupied the port town of Veracruz, followed by the Pancho Villa expedition of 1916. So like they did in the past, the White House could push for a military intervention.
So, like, this is the video I want to show. So the imperial agenda in terms of Mexico, when it goes back all the way back to 1848, we could have taken all of Mexico. In fact, it's actually the American wet dream to have all
of Mexico.
We would rather have all of Mexico. But watch this.
1848, after defeating Mexico in a war, the United States annexed these territories from it, and there were many notable individuals in the US that weren't happy at simply taking these lands. In fact, they wanted to manifest destiny the entirety of Mexico. Of course, they never did, but given how thoroughly the US won the war, this does raise a question. Why didn't the US take all of Mexico? So the war started after the US annexed Texas, and the new borders between the United States and Mexico became unclear. The Texans, and thus now the Americans, claimed the border to be here, whereas the Mexicans said it was here. Both sent troops, and after a small skirmish, the US declared war. The Americans won the war handily, and so when it was time to make peace, President James K. Polk had a dilemma. Just how much land should they take? Polk had been elected on a promise to expand the United States territorially. The war with Mexico had been contentious domestically, and there were several areas of disagreement. The first was slavery. Mexico had abolished slavery over a decade before the war. But if territory was taken from it, then its status as either a slave state or a free state wouldn't be clear. Those in the South wanted a place for the practice to expand to, and if all of Mexico could be turned into slave states, then its future would be secure. Polk was himself pro-slavery, but given that his party had just lost the midterms and the House was now controlled by the Whig Party, he had to compromise. The second issue was that Mexicans were seen as different. There were many US politicians who worried about a sudden influx of Spanish-speaking non-white Catholics upsetting life there. The third issue was one of practicality. Polk had promised a quick war against an inferior enemy which would give Americans lots of free land. As the war had dragged on and American troops had to move further and further into Mexico, even occupying its capital, this was no longer the case. As such, incorporating all of Mexico would have led to a long and expensive guerrilla war. Those on the opposing side, including future President James, I guess it's okay if you secede Buchanan, wanted all of Mexico. Their arguments were that the US could handle any insurgency similarly to how they had handled the Native Americans before this. They also argued that all of Mexico should be annexed on financial grounds. Mexico's northern territories were somewhat barren, whereas the south was much more arable and would allow the US Navy access to southern ports, further expanding its reach. It was also believed that annexing all of Mexico would make up for the cost of the war. So why did the lesser annexation plans win out? Well, it was mostly down to a man called Nicholas Trist. Trist was sent to negotiate a peace settlement, and Polk had ordered him to obtain these territories. Trist was largely seen as being too pro-Mexican by the army, and so Polk fired him. The problem was that Trist simply ignored him, and then negotiated a lesser settlement anyway. He did this because he opposed the war and didn't believe that America could be both a republic and an empire. He presented this lesser treaty to an unhappy president who just wanted everything over with at this point. Polk had hoped that this lesser treaty would be signed off by a hostile house. This worked, and despite most Americans actually wanting more of, but not all of Mexico, America only annexed this. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and a special thanks.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Some anti-war guy was like, fuck this.
Yeah, you could thank that one guy for not literally taking over Mexico, because we would have. We were this close.
Yeah, some guy was
we were
like, no.
this close. And that's my question to everyone. I mean, like, if we could do this 100 something years ago, what's stopping us from doing it again with an even more powerful military?